The TDS meta, which is the most complicated thing for absolutely no reason. Over the years, this meta has drastically changed, where towers from before that may have been mediocre were massively buffed and incorporated in the current meta. And in this video, I want to talk about how this meta changed and why the current meta is probably the most overpowered variation in TDS history. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe, please. Alright, let's yap about meta. We begin all the way back in 2019 and 2020, the quote-unquote golden era of TDS, as a lot of people would probably say. The meta back then was pretty cut and dry, I would say, although the rest is kind of up to different people's opinions. The three main meta towers at that current time were most definitely Outlaw, John, and Commander. Outlaw was the old version of Ranger, and was meta because of three main factors. One, it gained hidden detection, meaning it was able to flawlessly defeat hidden enemies. Two, it was stun immune, which made it able to do continuous damage basically forever, or until the enemy died. And the third factor, for the main reason why Outlaw would be meta for like years, is the infamous fire rate bug. The fire rate bug has been a really fucking annoying thing to deal with over the years, and while currently it's so much less of a threat against your towers nowadays, during 2019 it completely butchered some towers and their potential. Prior to the overhaul update from 2019 to summer of 2020 basically, the fire rate bug made, for example, a minigunner go from looking like this to this. It was that bad, believe it or not. But the reason Outlaw basically negates this horrible bug is because of how the fire rate bug itself worked. To put it simply, the fire rate bug affected fast firing towers significantly worse than slow firing towers. So while the minigunner's fire rate would be basically reduced to atoms because of the fire rate bug, the Outlaw's fire rate would be almost the exact same. And on top of that, Commander was actually bugged, being referenced in this Elite video.
He no longer more than doubles the fire rate of the towers, which is what he used to do in the old version of TDS.
Yeah, somehow they fucked up this equation and he did double the fire rate. So this meant that Outlaw was essentially a super soldier of a tower, which was stun immune, did fuck tons of damage, and was not affected by the fire bug at all, which is why it was no surprise why he was in the metal for so long. Commander himself is pretty self-explanatory, as with his fire rate ability, he was able to super buff the cliff tower Satoru Gojo and make the fire bug a little less hell to deal with for the rest of the towers. And John, who was the old version of the current militant, was meta because he was a really good support tower. But more importantly, more shit to buff Outlaw. There were also some other subjective meta towers like Pyromancer, Mortar, and unbelievably Rocketeer. I feel like a fitting title for this era could probably be anything that just bypasses the fire bug as best as possible. Enemies during that time period were insanely stupid and didn't really stun in an effective manner. So all that really mattered was just trying to do damage to a boss in an effective way. And it actually stayed like this for a decent time period. There were some events that came and went and some other uninteresting shit until we arrive at the overhaul update. The infamous overhaul update, the most controversial update in TDS history currently. And to sum it up, they basically upped their game quality by 200% and made the towers and zombies look cool, but for the price of literally everything being nerfed into the fucking floor. For example, remember good old Rocketeer? Remember how I said how he was actually good in like 2019? Well, say goodbye to those days, because holy shit. Also, the fire bug is still in the game and still wreaking havoc on towers. That's the overhaul update, have fun. Anyway, the main reason the meta shifts from here is because of a small but minor detail they added with overhaul, with the introduction of the hardcore mode. Now, hardcore mode is, as the name implies, pretty hard, especially since all the towers were fucking hard nerfed anyway. But if you decided to triumph Void River's Schoolhouse, you would be awarded a brand new currency. Gems. And with new currency comes one new tower, because fuck that other one, and that one too, for now. This brand new tower was an absolute unit, and if you acquired such tower, you would become Death Destroyer of Worlds, the Accelerator Tower. And boy, what a history this fellow has. To anyone who played TDS, at least during this time period and up to the Accelerator rework, you can probably understand why the meta slightly shifts here, but in case you didn't, Accelerator was fucking broken. Not only did he have insane rage, but he also had this really cool ability where he would beam zombies with a laser beam that did 200 fucking DPS. And here's where the meta shifts into the Dark Ages, the dawn of the Accelerator meta. Now, along with Ranger and Commander, we had an overpowered guy with a mini particle accelerator in his hands. Also, John is not in this meta anymore because he was downgraded into a mercenary. Yes, this is a downgrade. Either way, this meta would remain the same for years until a very important update came into the game in March of 2022. The update that would be, like I said before, the new Entity System update. This update came with a boatload of bug fixes, along with Militant being buffed, and that Commander bug being fixed, where he gave double the intended fire rate buff. But another thing that was indirectly changed was in fact the fire rate bug. Somehow the fire rate bug was slightly fixed, making it affect towers the same way, but now in a much less magnitude than before. This buffed basically every fast firing tower, including the Wicked Accelerator and also Gold Minigunner. So the meta is still like accelerator meta, but it's also just big DPS towers, but also Ranger works as an option as well. Along with Medi being fixed to actually be stun immune so she could clear stuns, and enemies still having the ability to be baited quite easily. This was where TDS became extremely easy for high level players. Enemies were so outdated that for modes like Fallen and Hardcore mode, it was almost like you were cheating because everything was just so outdated. The next update would only add to that current meta by bringing a unique DPS tower. The Engineer Tower, a unique gal with Stark-like intelligence, being able to build sentries at the cost of scrap, gather from damaging enemies, and there goes her fucking sentries. Oh my god. When the Engineer initially came out, this was the case, and she was unfortunately pretty bad as a result. Units can be killed, unlike towers, and no other unit in the game up to that point was able to survive any boss attack, until a quick update changed that. Below thankfully changed Engineer sentries dying when a boss used an attack by giving them a shield. This created the first stun immune DPS tower, because Engineer sentries were the source of her firepower rather than herself. While the current meta during this time was still DPS towers, but Ranger works as well, this pattern of stun immunity would be very important until the next meta shift. August 2nd, 2024, the inevitable Fallen rework came out, which is where the meta shifts unfortunately down in quality, I would say. How it did this is quite simple. Enemies became smarter and harder at the same time, meaning that enemies capable of stunning would target towers in groups and frame one stun towers. This specific attack pattern would become a big problem for two of the meta towers I mentioned earlier, Golden Minigunner and Accelerator. Because they took a couple seconds to charge up before they could attack enemies, this would leave them vulnerable to stuns before they could even fucking damage something. And it doesn't help that more stun immune towers came out before and after the Fallen rework, making them perfect candidates for this new meta, the stun immune meta. Because more stun immune towers released meant that you didn't need to sacrifice a tower slot to bring medic, this left you with more firepower and absolutely no fucking downside. So what's the aftermath of this new meta settling in? Well, I feel as though the game is in a rough spot because of it. You can only benefit from using stun immune towers, which makes you question why you would use something like Minigunner if you have Gatling gun. It's a bit of a poor example, but you know, it still makes sense. Plus, you get more tower slots to bring something instead of medic, so you can bring Electroshocker to help stun enemies. This stun immune meta also reduces the amount of overall creativity you can have in a loadout. If you have to consider stun vulnerability when creating a loadout, this really limits your options with what to bring. I'm not the first person to say this, but I despise the fucking Accelerator meta. But if that same meta existed where every tower was actually usable, it probably would have been a lot better than this current one. One change I can immediately think of as to how to fix this is by introducing more counters to stuns. Possible changes like towers that need to charge up can't be stunned during that downtime, or giving towers more range. Or maybe if meta gets a good fucking rework, that might fix it as well. By the way, you can still use towers like the Accelerator, but it just got a lot harder, and it also isn't enforced, unlike using Ranger or Gatling gun. The TDS meta has evolved drastically, going from using towers that ignore bugs that held tower potential down by a lot to basically the same shit, but for stun. Honestly, this new meta is really annoying, and it's frustrating because there are many easy fixes that could be made to make it manageable. Either way, while meta towers are currently just better to use than the rest, the other towers are also usable as well. This video is not trying to coax you into thinking that other towers are bad because of the meta. Hell, I think every tower in the game is good to some extent, but it's just stuns that hold back certain towers a lot more than the rest. And to finally recap the meta after I yap about it for like 40 minutes, I feel as though these are the current meta towers. You will probably see at least one of these towers in most players' loadouts. Even if these meta towers are objectively better to bring right now, that doesn't mean I encourage it. Hope you can create unique combinations for defeating various modes, because at the end of the day, all that matters in this game is killing shit and having fun. Have a good day.